What?
Welcome to our cult.
Yes, okay.
Well, you can call BaBayit a cult.
Well,
Ben, do you want to make the announcement?
there's
I
culture
can,
and there's
or
cult.
maybe
It really depends. So I thought maybe I would start by telling you.
So I just interrupt for 1 second.
You
because
can interrupt for 3 seconds.
Oh, wow.
It's your time.
So I'm Ben. I've contacted most of you on WhatsApp just to make sure you all got the message today. I'm from BaBayit, and we're a grassroots organization. We do lots of different things. We have Shiurim, we have hikes, we have chesed opportunities, which Nili's running. If you'd like to get involved, please approach either me or Nili or Elisheva, and find a way we can use your talents to better the community. This is for people in their 20s and 30s, young Olim, Israelis, anyone else who wants to join along in their 20s and 30s. Simcha. So just approach us, and we'd love to see you back at our events.
Future events?
Future events, yes. So we have a chesed opportunity. Thank you, Nili. Nili's more experienced in this than I am. So this Friday, you've got on Tel Chai, actually not far from you, that nursing home. There's a chesed opportunity at 9 a.m. in the morning, I believe. Yes, I think they're doing Nili Kabbalat Shabbat or something with the residents of the nursing home on Tel Chai. Is that correct?
Music and Danish.
Sorry?
Oh yeah, Amaya is the one organizing that.
Oh, very good. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I saw that you posted in the thing, but I didn't realize it was Maya who's doing it. So here we go. Here's an example. Maya, getting involved. Very good. Next week we do not have a shiur planned as yet. Tuesday night, the week after the 11th, we do. So it'll be also 7:38, and we'd like to see you here.
So sign up for Friday because we want people to come and have a joyful atmosphere. And so far we're 3 people.
Okay, so we need more than that.
That means
All right, so take it away.
Want to tell them how you met me?
Yeah, okay, sure.
So
Thank you. Yes, I'll give you a proper introduction. Yes, as I said, this is my first time doing this. So how I met Rabbi Kravitz was actually, I reacquainted with him at the Chabad of Baka Friday night dinner a few weeks ago, and spoke very nicely. I thought, well, this is great. But then also I remembered that he had spoken to my high school in Mariah back in Australia more than 20 years ago. And I remembered the stories. He was so engaging that I came up to him and afterwards, like, "Oh, you spoke at my school, all these years ago. It's the regular Friday assembly." And he was, I was so taken with Rabbi Kravitz, I even remembered, 20 plus years later. So, Rabbi Kravitz has done amazing things, for the sake of Jewish people, taking people out of cults, out of away from missionary activity. Unfortunately, even in Katamon, I picked up 2 copies of the New Testament today from Park San Simon. They put them in the bookshelves there. So it does happen in these areas, and without further ado, Rabbi Kravitz, please.
Thanks. So I'm Bentzion. You don't have to call me Rabbi. My wife is Devorah. We have taken an apartment here. This Thursday will be 1 month at the corner of Rachel Imenu and Tel Chai. And no, we took it for a month. If we owned it, then you could say wow. And now on Friday we're moving to Shara Chesed to a smaller apartment, and we're looking for a full-time place to make Aliyah finally. Baruch Hashem. My daughter got married last week here, and she made Aliyah. And Baruch Hashem. And while I'm here, whenever I come, I try to interact with people and offer my experiences in life, perhaps to help them through challenges they may be going through, or to offer counseling, or to speak to different groups, and hopefully to be inspirational if I can be. My own background is that when I was at the University of Texas in Austin, majoring in communications, I bumped into a friend who I'd known in high school who was not religious at all at the time, and he was wearing a kippah. Now, that may not seem very strange to any of you, but in 1973, in Texas, it was not usual to walk around a campus with a kippah on your head. Even now in America, sadly, with the resurgence of anti-Semitism, some students are a little bit nervous about wearing their kippah. which I never thought would happen. But unfortunately, in some places, it has. On the other hand, there are many campuses that have a very beautiful, strong Jewish life, and the Hillel and Chabad work very well together. Friday night, everybody comes to Chabad for Shabbat dinner, and then on Shabbat day, everybody goes to the particular tefillah group or whatever that they prefer. So I have been dealing with a certain kind of expertise in an area that not a lot of people do. And I'll tell you why I got involved in it. Before I became more involved in becoming more traditional or religious or whatever term you might use, I was not. And what I was is very much into martial arts. I started martial arts when I was about 12. And because in high school there was nothing in the high school you could do. There was wrestling. I was on the wrestling team. When I went to University of Texas, I was on the judo team and competed in judo. I later studied karate and some kung fu, and I did 7 years of Krav Maga with probably one of the best instructors in the world, Amir Perez, who was an instructor for the Israeli Navy SEALs here. And we're very close friends. And one day our coach told us that there was going to be a special evening where all the athletes in the university could meet with 3 professional American football players. And only people that were involved in athletic things could go. So for me, I thought meeting someone who's a professional athlete like that would be really cool. So I went to this auditorium, and there were hundreds and hundreds of athletes. I was probably the smallest person in the room at that time, because if you know anything about judo and wrestling, they have weight classes. So that worked really, because I was really small in high school. I didn't even break 100 pounds when I was a senior. So I was in the lowest weight class, and here I'm in judo, I'm also small. So everybody's like these giants compared to me. And I'm listening to these speakers, and they're talking about becoming a super athlete. So in my mind, probably the most painful thing we had to do in athletics to work out is we had to run up and down staircases to get in shape. I figured they're going to tell us to take a 20-pound bag of cement and put it on our back and run up and down and become a super athlete. And to my surprise, these 3 football players held hands, and they said, if you accept Jesus into your life, then you will become a super athlete. And I'm like, what? And then they said, everybody should get down on their knee and say a prayer and accept him into their life. And at that moment, I became the tallest person in the room, because everybody else got down on their knee, but I didn't. And even though I wasn't observant, I wasn't keeping kosher, I wasn't keeping Shabbat, but I knew that I wasn't going to do that. And I left. The next day, I came back from a class to my dormitory, and I mean, I can picture it in my mind now as if it just happened. 2 football players sitting in front of the door to my room, waiting for me. And I tried, how did you find me? He said, well, you signed in to the program. Now, the program was called Athletes in Action. Now, that doesn't sound very Christian, does it? At all. But I didn't know it was sponsored by another group called Campus Crusade for Christ. Well, if I had heard the word crusade, I think it would have, that has a very, sensitive meaning. And they're there, and they want to talk to me, and I don't want to talk to them. And they're pressuring me to talk to them. So I finally said, okay, you can come in my room, I'll give you 5 minutes as long as you promise that when the 5 minutes are up, you'll leave. Well, 5 hours later, because I couldn't get up and walk out of my own room, what am I going to do? And they left me somewhat confused, because the method that they took was to bombard me with Bible passages that sounded like the narrative that I was familiar with about Christianity growing up in a country that is predominantly Christian. So you automatically hear about these things. So everything seemed to fit, and I was almost shocked that these things were in the Bible. And I didn't use the word Torah back then, I used the word Bible. And I was confused. I'm like, what's going on here? Now my brother, who is 3.5 years older than me, who went to Brandeis University in Massachusetts, and at this point was, after a year in Israel, he was, I considered him a religious fanatic, because he wouldn't drive in a car on Saturday. And he wouldn't go out to a non-kosher restaurant with us. So to me, I'm like, I gotta have my McDonald's, not the one on Ben Yehuda that says kosher mahadran. It didn't say kosher or mahadran. And I had to, I was just like, that was the lifestyle I had at the time. And so I called him up and I said, do you have any books about Jesus? And his response was, I warned you not to go to school in Texas. And I said, no, you don't understand. I said, our father was very street smart. People that grew up, my father was born in 1921. So if you know about America, Jewish schooling was not something that everybody, my mother grew up in the most Jewish section of Brooklyn, but there were really no schools for girls to go to. So she never really got a Jewish education. My father, at age 17, enlisted in the army because there was no way to get employment, and he needed money for the family. So they didn't have that education. But he didn't even finish high school, and he definitely didn't go to college. But he was very street smart, and he always told us, no matter what anyone tells you, get a second opinion. Whether you're buying a car, whether you're doing anything, always don't take the first opinion someone says and accept it. Get a second opinion and explore things. So I told my brother, that's what I want to do. I just want to hear another opinion. These guys seem to make sense. So he sent me a few books. There was no email. There were no faxes back then. So he mailed me some things to read. And after I read it, I said, you know what? Their argument isn't completely overwhelming anymore. There might be another opinion. So I kind of pushed it all to the back. And slowly, my friend, who was wearing the kippah on campus, started inviting me to programs. And I didn't want to go. And then he said, there'll be girls there. I said, that's interesting. And then he said, and there'll be good food. And I said, okay, I'm coming. And slowly I started to enjoy it. And I can only speak from my own experience. I discovered through my father that our family came from a very religious family. In fact, we're descendants of one of the students of the Baal Shem Tov, if you've heard of him, the founder of the Hasidic movement. And obviously, pre-Holocaust and coming to America, things kind of got lost. And I felt like I was coming home to a certain extent. And I decided to study more, not with the intention of becoming a rabbi, not at all. But what happened was, having had that experience with having to interact with Christianity, like on a very personal, and experiencing that sense of confusion, and realizing that if you do look and get second opinions, there are answers. And I started meeting other people that were going through similar situations, or they had a brother or sister that was having that kind of experience, and we'd sit around talking about and learning some of the answers. And then I eventually went to California, and I worked for a really cool rabbi named Rabbi Shlomo Schwartz, whose nickname was Schwartzy. And he was probably the first Chabad rabbi on a college campus. And he was so cool. He was into the Grateful Dead. He knew the guys on the band. He was just an amazing guy, and I learned so much. He mentored me so much. And as I was just doing that kind of work, you'd meet students who were enticed or interested in Christianity. Now a lot of it happens because they meet someone who's not Jewish, and they get into a relationship, and out of respect, they go to church with them, and they'll hear a sermon. And I started trying to learn more about Christianity so I could know what to answer. You probably know that in the Mishnah of Ethics of Our Fathers, Pirkei Avot, one of the Mishnah says, Da Malat Tashiv, you should know what to answer. And some people will shy away from this kind of work. I felt I had like a mission to try to help people. And there's another passage in Sefer Devarim that it says that God says in the Torah that when you will go into Eretz Yisrael to settle it, it's so lo lilmod la'asod k'ta'avot hagayim. You should not learn to do the ways of the nations. And Rashi, who is the most classic biblical commentator, quoting from a Gemara, poses a question. Why does this verse have to say, don't learn to do? Wouldn't it have been sufficient to simply say, don't do the ways of the nations? Or it could have said what? Don't learn. Does that make sense, that question? So he explains that to learn their ways to do them, that you shouldn't do. But to learn them so you can help people to understand why they shouldn't believe in it or be enticed to it, that's permissible. So that became kind of my...
Permissible or wanted?
What?
Permissible or wanted?
I don't know the difference. But it's you're permissible at least if you're doing it for that purpose. So I felt an obligation because people were coming to me with questions. And then something happened in I'm trying to remember the year, it's a long time ago. Probably 84. A missionary group known as Jews for Jesus in the summer rented out a dormitory at UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles. They had a big conference there, and I went to try to meet people. And the head of that movement berated me for coming, and he said, if you want to be a counter missionary, you better learn your stuff. So I went home and I said, someone threw down the gauntlet, right? The challenge. So I better learn it really well. I'm better than them. But over the years, I've learned that it's not as much about knowing the answer to every question, but it's knowing how to listen, how to be a friend of someone, how to make that person feel comfortable talking to you. I helped a woman who, I have to be very careful about confidentiality. She was raised in an Orthodox family. She got involved in a cult actually here in Israel. And when her parents asked me to speak to her and she called me, this is about 9 years ago, she was on the phone with me for 2 hours. And I think I said maybe 20 words. And at the end of the conversation, she said, you're the first person to ever listen to me. So sometimes knowing how to listen and just showing a person that although you may not agree with everything that they say, you're willing to hear them and try to understand where they're coming from and what the issues are, and then to be able to have a dialogue. I found that to be much more helpful. I'm not really interested in getting into a theological debate with people. I got 4 months ago an email from a woman in Haifa, an Israeli, who got involved and became a Christian. And her emails were very confrontational and aggressive and attacking me and the organization and making accusations. And I just kept writing back to her positive messages to the point that she said, you're just putting on an act. That's not who you guys really are. And then I sent her a little Devar Torah for Shavuot that I wrote. And some people have a custom to eat dairy on Shavuot. Anybody have that custom on Shavuot to eat chalav or something? So chalav is, what's the gematria, the numerical value of chalav? It's 40. So they say maybe that's the reason, because 40, the 40 days on Har Sinai. I wrote something different. I wrote something personal that I came up with. And I said that milk comes from the essence of the mother, and it nourishes the child. And it nourishes the essence. So in Hebrew we say, especially if in the yeshiva way of saying it, we'd say the atzmut, the essence of a person. And how do you say bones in Hebrew? Atzamot. It's the same root. So I said in the same way that milk nourishes the bone, So the milk of the Torah nourishes the neshama, the essence of the person. And that maybe that's the symbolism of milk, because God is nourishing us. I thought it was meaningful. To me, it was meaningful. I always say things can be meaningful to me and not resonate with anyone else. But it resonated with me. And I sent it to her. And to my surprise, she wrote back, "That was beautiful." So finally, I made a kesher of some sort. So I always felt that it was much better to, rather than be confrontational and argumentative. I mean, I think there's sometimes a place for that. I was at a Jewish festival in LA, a festival celebrating Israel's birthday, and maybe 15, 20,000 people during the day came to it. And some missionaries came in, with their T-shirts that said who they were, and they found our booth, and everybody's saying, "You've got to debate them," and I'm having a discussion about one of the psukim that they really believed in. And I kept telling them, because one of their arguments, I don't know if you've heard this, one of their arguments is that we need Christianity and Jesus because we have no way to get rid of our sins anymore. Now, for a person who doesn't care about sin, that's not even an issue. But if they can get a person to start worrying about sin and mortality, there's a famous book written in the 1950s by a British professor, William Sargent, called Battle for the Mind. And in it he talks about brainwashing that went on prisoners of war, but not even in the Korean War, and how the North Koreans brainwashed people. And he gives one example in his book of a certain denomination of Christianity where John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist movement, would actually preach hell, fire, and brimstone, but he had little puppets that people were manipulating from the rafters of devils and stuff to incite people to be terrified. And he would get their emotions changing so much, and he would tell them there's no escape route from this except this one. So, for example, if I knew this building better than anyone else and the fire alarms went off, and I said, "Okay, we'll go out that window." In the panic, perhaps everybody would follow me because they trust me, even though that's probably not a good exit, the window, when we're on the second floor. But when you're panicked and you're scared and you rely on an authority figure, you tend to want to go there. So he used that as an example. So I started seeing that also within Christianity, that there was this idea that they created this idea that you don't have a Beit HaMikdash anymore, you can't bring carbonot, sacrifices, that was the only way to get rid of sin if you brought one, so they're building this kind of straw man argument with all these things that people were not familiar with, and then say, okay, so you have no way to get rid of your sin, this is the only way, believe in him. So, but if you go and do the research, you see that if you brought 1,000 sacrifices, but you didn't have any remorse for the thing you did wrong, the sacrifice didn't do anything. It didn't accomplish a thing. You had to, the prerequisite to bringing it was remorse and a sense and regret on the thing that you did. And in fact, I showed people in Hosea, in the book of Hosea, when there was no Beit HaMikdash that the Jews could go to, because it was blocked and they couldn't get to it, the Navi said, offer your prayer in place of sacrifices. So I started learning all these kind of answers and responses. What?
Korbanot is only for sins in Shogeg.
That's another point. It's not every sin even needed a sacrifice, and only if it was which is a good question, by the way. You would think that if in case anyone didn't catch it, what you were saying was that in the book of Vayikra it says the only sins that needed a sacrifice were those that were done accidentally or unintentionally, bishkaga. Common sense would maybe flip it around and say, if you did something intentionally, you better go buy an animal and sacrifice it, because that was serious. But accidentally, it was just an accident. But because the very reason that we would say, well, it was only an accident. I woke up on Shabbat and I love my cup of coffee, right? Who has coffee in the morning when they get up? Hey. Okay, I have to have my cup of coffee. Come Shabbat, and I forgot it was Shabbat, and I go in, I turn on the fire, I heat the water, and I make my coffee. So that would be considered breaking the Shabbat, but it was not intentional. So since you might say it's only an accident, you might think I don't even have to do teshuvah. I don't have to feel bad about it. But because you were careless, you bring the korban, and the whole process of bringing it helped you to realize, what did I do? What do we have? What kind of animal did you bring? Is anybody familiar? It had to have blemishes or no blemishes? Anybody know? No blemishes. So what is it? You had to check the animal. You had to have a magnifying glass and check it. So a good side note. I don't know. You'll let me know when we're getting close. If anybody gets bored. Anybody bored yet? Hope not.
No, but can you go back to the story of that you were at a festival?
Yeah, I'm going to. This is all part of that.
Okay.
But thank you for reminding me because I get distracted. So, and I will get back. So, I just lost what I was saying. What was it?
The sacrifice,
Sacrifice.
blemish.
So a good story was, who has? Does anybody here have the custom before Pesach that you hide pieces of chumatz in your house and you're searching around with a candle or something and you look for it, bedikat chumatz, it's called. We always did that as a kid, and I always wondered. My mom would write down where she put it, so we wouldn't forget in case we didn't find it. I said, "What is this? What are we doing?" So there's a story of a rabbi in the old country who had a room that was maybe 50 square meters, very small, not even that, very small, and he spent like 5 hours searching for the 10 pieces of bread. How do you spend 5 hours looking for? It takes me 10 minutes to check my whole house, right? So they asked him. He said, "You're looking only for the bread. I'm looking for the chumetz, the leaven in myself, the ego, the mistakes that I've made. I'm using that event to do introspection into my own life." So I said, so checking the animal for blemishes is an opportunity to look and say, what was my blemish? So I was explaining it to the two missionaries, and then I told them that you can bring your prayer in place. And they said, show us a pasuk that says you can bring your prayer. So I told them the one, Hosea. They didn't like that one. So Neshama Parim Sifaseinu. So I said, I got one. Vayoma Hadonoi, and God said, Salachli Kidvarecha. God said to Moses, I forgive you according to your words. And we say it on Yom Kippur. It's one of the biggest verses said on Yom Kippur. I said, that's pretty clear right there. And their mouths dropped, and they didn't know what to say, and they left. And then to get to the punchline of the joke, because I don't like doing those debates, they came, some people were watching. There must have been about 40 people listening. And they came over and said, how do you know the New Testament so well? So I said, I make it up as I go along, just like they did. Which is not true. I've studied it. So there's different ways of interacting with people. Sometimes you need to do a kind of a debate, because I'm more interested in trying to help the people that are listening, that are being caught up. A number of years ago, my wife Devorah and I came to Israel for 3 weeks, and we took an apartment right near the Bika Olim on Strauss, and there was a lot of construction still going on then. And we're walking through Ben Yehuda, and I turned to my wife and I said, I think that's a missionary over there talking to these young Israeli girls. And he's speaking in English, and they're trying to understand him, which already put them at what? A disadvantage, right? So I'm listening, I'm looking at him and listening, and he looks at me and he says, are you a rabbi? I said, yes. Are you going to beat me up? I said, why would you ask that? He says, well, they warned us that if we come here and we share the gospel, people are going to beat us up. So in my mind, this was an opportunity to say something to help those girls. So I said, no, I'm not going to beat you up. In fact, I think we have a lot in common. Now, I was building up a point, obviously. I said, really, what do we have in common? So I said, no, I think God impregnated a human woman, and they had a child, and the child was God in a body, and he had amazing supernatural strengths. And this guy's eyes opened up like you can't imagine. And he looked at me and says, what was his name? What was his name? You know who he thought I was going to say? Who did he want me to say? Jesus. So he looked at me, what was his name? I said, Hercules. And he went, but that's a Greek myth. So I said, and what language was the New Testament written in? And he said, Greek. So the girls started laughing, and they went and left, and he's like this, and my wife is like, come on, let's go. I have enough of you doing this stuff. But so sometimes there's a time to do it, but I think it has to be done in a way that may be strong but not offensive, because then the person could say, look at how that person acted and use that against us. So I've had a lot of experiences like these over the years and helped a lot of people. Part of what I like to do, and it's in our mission statement, because we do have an organization. Those that are not familiar with it, it's called Jews for Judaism. We have a website. We have a YouTube channel with over 400 videos that people can watch for free. I write every week a Devar Torah. I call it a spiritual insight, which is based on the Parsha, but it also finds something in the Parsha that I can use to demonstrate how to answer some argument that the missionaries. And I just posted this week's on Facebook. Usually get about 5,000 or 6,000 hits on Facebook, and I email it to about 8,000 or 9,000 people, and who knows how many they share it with. So hopefully it reaches 1 or 2 people, I hope. But I get a lot of emails, about it. And you can always go to our website, Jews for Judaism. We even made a Hebrew section, because there are, as you mentioned, there are a lot of missionaries in Israel. But you shouldn't think that's something new. If you read books on the history of Jerusalem, I just read a book by someone last name Montefiore, and he's a historian in England, and he wrote this gigantic book on Jerusalem. And what shocked me was, it's like, there's always been Christians here, always trying to influence people and to share their beliefs with people. It's not something new. Now, what's a little bit is scary is how much credibility certain missionaries have gotten because of the political and financial support that they lend to the state of Israel, which is, very commendable that they do that. But when I meet people that say Christian evangelicals are our best friends, okay, they're friends on that level, but they do oftentimes, not always, have ulterior motives. And if you found 2 New Testaments in the neighborhood, and there's a missionary group in Netanya that has a school, and they have a website, and they produce videos of interviews of people, Israelis, who've converted to Christianity, become Yehudi Mashiachim, Messianic Jews as they call it, and they, through the internet, they can reach so many people. When I started this, most of the activity was done with them standing on a street corner, or putting an ad in some of the bigger publications in America. I don't know if you've ever, who even reads Time Magazine or Newsweek anymore, right? I mean, it exists, but that was where you got your news from. It was exciting to get this week's Time Magazine. Now you don't need to stand on a street corner. You just have a website, and you can say whatever you want, and unless it's super offensive, nobody's going to take it down. So it's just, you go to our YouTube channel, you see all our videos, and right in the middle there'll be a video from the missionaries. They get posted there. So people are, I help the family, I'm working with a family right now, who are children of Israelis who moved to America, and their son, a young boy, high school boy, just from going on the internet, he got convinced to believe in Christianity. But why is it so attractive? I think that's maybe where we should go now. Because for many of us, we see Christianity, although we share common goals of morality and living a good life, as pretty different in our fundamental beliefs. So and we know historically that Jews were very, very firm about not being willing to convert. Even when they were under the threat of being tortured or even murdered. Now, there were cases in history where people, rather than have their children killed in front of them, they did accept Christianity. But there were many more cases, especially if you know the history of Spain and Portugal, and the term that used to be used was Marrano, now they say conversos. that they hid their Jewish identity rather than to just take the easier route, which might have been just to accept Christianity. So what would make it so attractive to people today? So I think that's an important question, because if you want to understand it. So I think there's a number of factors. Some of it has to do with their methodology, and some of it has to do with what people are lacking. So if a person is lacking a sense of spiritual connection and their cup is empty, this doctor I mentioned earlier, William Sargent, he said, and he was not Jewish and he was not writing as a theological book, he said he found that the prisoners of war in North Korea who resisted brainwashing were the ones that had a deep faith in something, whatever it might have been. They had something already. So it's kind of like you have a cup and it's got something in it. It's harder to pour something else into it because you already have something to believe in. And I think if you're already part of a community of other people that are like-minded, you have that support system. But if you don't have anything, or you've been turned off, a lot of the videos that I see on this One for Israel missionary thing from Netanya are people who talk about their stories about how they went and they had a question and they went into a synagogue, and because they didn't have a kippah, they were thrown out. I mean, I'm not sure that's the exact story, but something similar to that. These negative experiences, or they had a negative interaction with, I don't have to tell you, but there is a big polarization between what we would call Chilonim and Haredi. Now, I don't consider myself Haredi, but I guess I would look like it perhaps, but there's a polarization that happens here. So this One for Israel example, one of their interviews of their leader, he said, we're the solution for that. We're the solution. You don't have to go to the extremism of the Haredim to find spirituality. What we're offering, you can be married to a non-Jewish person, and it's okay, and you can have a relationship with God, and we've got the truth, and they don't have the truth, and look how hypocritical they are. And they're offering that as an alternative. And they're slowly attracting more and more people. A number of years ago, the Jerusalem Post did a survey, and they came up with a figure of probably over 20,000 Israelis that have accepted Christianity. Now that may not sound like a big number, but it is a significant number. Now, how many of them are they counting their spouses who may not be Jewish? Because that's a very common factor that we noticed, that a lot of the Israelis who have converted, have a non-Jewish spouse. And that kind of, they don't have to deal with the Rabbanut, they don't have to deal with anything. They're just, everything's, we're better than the Rabbanut. Look what we found. So that is a vacuum. There's a Gemara, and it's kind of I don't want to call it silly, but it's kind of an entertaining Gemara that says, what do you do if you cleaned your house for Passover and you see a mouse running around your house before Pesach, and it's got a piece of bread in its mouth, and it goes into the hole in the wall? You have to rip, I mean, it doesn't say this, but you have to rip the wall apart to find the bread, or it goes something. So I'm not here to discuss that, but one of the sayings in the Gemara that it says, Einach bara ganva ela chura ganva. The mouse is not the thief, the hole in the wall is the thief. Have you ever heard that? So you could blame the missionaries as much as you want. They're the mouse who are grabbing the bread. But if you've got a hole in the wall and you don't patch it up, who's to blame? So if we're not going out of our way to be friendly to people that may not look as observant as us or as spiritual with us, then we're leaving a void. So I personally kind of made it my mission that I'm super friendly, to the extent my wife thinks, there's always, come on, let's go. You talk to them, everybody, hi, Shabbat Shalom, hi, Yom Tov, how are you, where are you from, what do you do? And I meet people like that. And I'm always trying to encourage them. I have a friend here in Israel. He was a commander in Sayeret Sanchanim, and he came to America to work, and he was not religious at all. And I met him. I like I mentioned, I've done Krav Maga for many, many years. I'm a madricheri, if you know what that is. I'm a firearms instructor. And we met, and I started inviting him for Shabbat. He would ride his bike to us on Shabbat and park it in our backyard. and he came to my daughter's wedding last week. And he gave them a gift, and he wrote a note saying, your family took me in when I was alone, when I didn't feel any sense of spirituality, and I found my neshama at your home. Now, would I say that he's Orthodox? No, but he is more connected to his identity. So if we can patch up the hole, that's one less person who's vulnerable. Now, there's another flip side to it. What happened back in the 70s that was an actual strategy with tactics of how to make Christianity more palatable, more comfortable for a Jewish person, there was an actual game plan that they had. What was the game plan? The biggest obstacle that they found as missionaries to get someone Jewish to accept Christianity was that deep down they felt that if they become a Christian, they won't be what anymore? Won't be Jewish anymore. They would feel like, I'm a traitor. I've abandoned my Jewish identity. And that was in the 70s, where the level of Jewish identity in America was much higher than it is even today. I mean, I heard statistics that the intermarriage rate in America among Jews and non-Jews is over 45% of marriages are intermarriages. Back in the 70s, it was probably 25, 30%, if I'm correct. So they saw this obstacle. The obstacle was that, wow, they'll feel like they're abandoning their Jewish identity. So they came up with this idea that will present Christianity in a way that it looks Jewish, which the church never really wanted. They used to call it, in his story, when Jews would try to keep their Jewish, they would call them Judaizers, that they would keep these rituals and customs. Even Constantine, the Roman emperor, in 326, when they held the Nicene Council in the city of Nicaea, which, interesting, is named after the goddess Nike, or the mythical god Nike, god of victory, and it was named because they were victorious, at least I read somewhere, victorious over Jerusalem. So they named this city in tribute, and I thought that was unbelievable. Here they're going to a city named after a Greek god to have a council determine their theological beliefs. Constantine wanted them, no longer can you have Easter during Passover time. Separate anything to do with Judaism from Christianity. So in a way that benefited Judaism, because Judaism and Christianity seemed worlds apart. So it was clear, if you joined that, you weren't part of this history anymore. So then it started to turn around. Let's bring it back. Let's not call Jews who become Christians Christians. Let's call them Messianic Jews. Let's not call their place of worship a church. Let's call it a Messianic synagogue. Let's not call their minister or priest a priest. Let's call him a Messianic rabbi. If they want to wear tzitzit, they can. If they want to wear a kippah, they can. If they want to celebrate Shabbat, they can do anything they want. If they want to light Shabbat candles, fine. I was at a conference of them, another place, and I heard them doing the bracha on the candles, and I became ill. Because what's the bracha when we light candles? Lahadlik ner shel Shabbat. Some people add Lahadlik ner shel Shabbat Kodesh. They said Lahadlik ner shel Shabbat b'shem Yeshua HaMashiach. I was like, oh my God, what have you done? And I'll tell you an interesting story. I met at one of these conferences. It was in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So I went to the conference with some of my colleagues, Rabbi Skobak, who you mentioned, who works in our Toronto office, and someone else. And we're talking to a guy there who grew up in a very traditional, conservative Jewish home. His father was a chazan in the conservative synagogue. And the year before, he was dressed with a kippah and tzitzit and everything. This year, he didn't have that at all. But we knew each other, and we were talking. And as we're talking, one of the leaders of the group came up and introduced himself. And this other guy said, oh, this is Rabbi Kravitz from Jews for Judaism. Almost had a Freudian slip. Did you see that? Jews for Judaism. And the guy looked at me and he says, how dare you come to our conference to steal our children? That's what he said to me. And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. We have a policy that we will not approach anyone unless they approach us. And even if a minor approaches us, we won't talk to them. That's our policy. Then he thought he would insult me, and I think if you follow the train of thought here, you'll understand what's going on. He looked at me and he said, Rabbi Kravitz, you are merely a rabbinic Jew. We are biblical Jews. Now, what did he mean? He meant that you are following the teachings of men and the history of rabbinic Judaism, but these Messianic Jews, we're just relying on the Bible. So we've got the truth, because we believe in what God said in the Bible, but you're following men, you're following human beings. So I looked at him and I said, what's that on your head? So he proudly said, this is my kippah sruga that I bought at the kippah store on Ben Yehuda when I was in Israel. And I said, show me where in the Bible it says to wear a kippah. You're not going to find a verse that says that you have to wear a kippah. I said, I see you wearing tzitzit. He was wearing tzitzit. Some of them don't even have a special garment. They actually tie it to the belt loop of their pants. So, but he had. I said, it's interesting. It has 5 knots and 8 strings. I said, show me where in the Bible it says to do that. And there are different customs. Rambam even writes of a very different custom than the way that many people practice today. And if you look at tzitzit, you'll see some people tie it differently. I said, show me where in the Bible it says that it should have 5 knots and 8 strings. And then I said to him, I see that the ladies lit Shabbat candles, albeit with that bracha that I mentioned. Where's the Bible does it say to light Shabbat candles? I saw Sunday morning you had a bagel and lox breakfast, and then everybody put on tefillin. I said, I'll give you the bagel and lox as Jewish, okay? But where does it say that the tefillin should be black? Where does it say that it should be square? Where does it say, and I don't know if you ever noticed it, that on the one that's on the head there's a shin? If you ever look, you'll see there's a shin. But on one side the shin has 3 lines, and the other side it has 4. And there's a whole beautiful explanation for why that is. I said, where's that in the Bible? I said, you have the audacity to call me merely a rabbinic Jew when everything you're doing to masquerade your Christianity is based on the rabbinical Judaism that you're attacking and saying is not biblical. Why are you using it? And he didn't have an answer. And I think that that's an important thing to understand how they're doing things. They're not doing the mitzvot of these customs because they believe that they have some spiritual obligation. Or, if you get a little bit more Kabbalistic or Hasidic philosophy, that the word mitzvah, you may be aware of this, I know in the United States, if you ask most Jews, what does the word mitzvah mean? I guarantee you 90% will, if they know it at all, they'll say it means a good deed. Would you agree that they might answer, it's a good deed? But does the word mitzvah really mean good deed? Or does ma'asim tovim mean good deeds? What does mitzvah really translate? A commandment. But according to the Kabbalah, the word mitzvah is connected to the Semitic root of the word tzavta, which is similar to modern Israeli tzevet. Tzevet is, you'll see it a lot of times. You see it when you get on El Al. The crew is called tzevet. A team of counselors is called tzevet. And to be a team or a group, everybody has to work together. You can't have a team of 5. You can't have a soccer team, and one guy's going to say, I'm not going to do what anyone else does. We don't have a plan. I'm going to do my own thing, and you guys play that way. You work together. You're connected. So in the ancient source of this word tzavta, the word means a connection. Chibur. So Chassidut and Kabbalah says that when you do a mitzvah, it's not just that you're being told to do something, you're being given an opportunity to be connected to the entity that we call God in English that has commanded it. So it's not, and I tell this to a lot of people that I'm counseling, you might look at all these rules and regulations as burdens. in my personal life, I look at them as opportunities to be connected. So they're not doing it for any spiritual reason. They're doing it because it's a custom and they want to feel their Jewish identity and maintain that. But when it comes down, does it really make a difference to them? It's just a modality, as they said on one of their things. Just a modality to show the Jew. Now, some people are more into it than others, and they have different reasons. So I could speak for hours. We're going almost. What I thought I would do is maybe take some questions now. Or I can tell more stories, and maybe through answering some of the questions, I will tell a story. How long do you usually go?
Usually, finish around 9, but questions are...
Okay, so that's kind of what I do, and I would not... Some of these missionaries say we're anti-Christian. I'm anti-proselytizing. I'm against coercion of any type. I'm even against coercion if it's coming even from Jewish groups. And I've had to work with different groups that are Jewish that are coercive. And I don't like coercion, and I like critical thinking. So I, in fact, for many years before I became a reserve police officer, I was a chaplain for one of the largest police agencies in the United States. And I became very close with a minister, or a pastor who's Baptist. And they asked me to give a class on Judaism. And I actually went to his church. And I kindly explained that I would not speak in the sanctuary. So he said, that's fine. You could speak in our social hall. And without even asking, this show you the derech eretz of this guy, he took down the cross and he made a star. And he put that up out of respect for me. And I didn't ask for it, but I thought it was very... And so we can have friends that are Christian that support Israel and help the Jewish community, and will stand up against anti-Semitism, as we see. Where I think people cross the line is, and I don't even think that it's even fair of us to tell people that if someone asks them what they believe in, that we have to censor them. Can we really censor people in a democracy, tell them what they can say and not say? I don't think so. But when it crosses the line and they're practicing deception and coercion, I think we can stand up against that. And that's what I've been trying to do. So that's what I do. That's what our organization does. And I hope that you will visit our website and get our weekly Devar Torah and realize looking beyond the surface is the secret of success. And I brought my laptop because I wanted to show you something. If I can get it on the screen to give you some examples of how important it is to look beyond. Just give me 1 second, please. Even though I'm sorry. There we go. Okay. Who is familiar with this logo of this organization? I'll try to turn it. If you know what I'm getting at, don't give it away. Don't give it away if you know. Don't give it away if you know. What? It went off? Hey, I thought you were giving it away and you weren't giving it away. Okay, I'm sorry, I must have touched something.
Hey, where'd you go? I have no clue, so you didn't need to worry about it.
Okay, hold on. Okay, if you know what I'm getting at, don't give it away if you've heard this before. You did in Australia. Okay, so everybody familiar with that? I know they have FedEx here, right? Okay, without saying out loud, if you don't see the arrow, raise your hand. If you don't see an arrow, raise your hand. Be honest. So raise it really high so we can see how many people don't see it. Okay? I want you to see the reaction when I show everybody where the arrow is. So if you look between the E and the X, right there, there's an arrow. You see it?
Oh.
You see it now? See right there in the white? Can you see it?
All right.
So when FedEx met with their company, designing company, to make their logo, the CEO said, I want something that says that we will get our package to the spot, like X marks the spot. So they integrated the arrow into the And you'll never look at FedEx again the same. But there's kind of a hidden message in here. But we're so used to it, we become accustomed, we're kind of on autopilot, that we don't look at things. So in America, to give an example of autopilot and how people are not using their critical thinking, there was a professor, I believe, near Seattle, who his graduate students, he gave them an assignment that counted for 30% of their final grade. They had to write a report about an endangered species of marine animal, which was a form of octopus that could for short periods of time actually come out of the water and to climb onto trees. It was called the North Pacific tree octopus. And it was endangered because whenever it would come out of the water, American bald eagles, which were in resurgence in the North Pacific, would swoop down and grab them and have their sushi breakfast or dinner, whatever it was. So they had to write a report. They had a whole week to write the report. So they all wrote the report. And in those days, the way you found out your grade is you came to the classroom and posted outside the door was everybody's name with their grade. And you see all these students there in shock because every single student failed this test. And I always ask, why do you think they failed? Why? They all wrote these amazing research papers on the North Pacific tree octopus, but they all failed. Why?
It's a fake creature.
What?
It's a fake creature.
No, that's not why they failed. The truth is, it is a fake creature. Someone created an entire website and made up an entire story with videos and photographs and things about this North Pacific tree octopus, and it does not exist, but that's not why he failed them. He failed them because not one student quoted a source different than that website. Not one of them went to the local aquarium. Not one of them went to the U.S. Forest Service. Not one of them went to the United States Department of Endangered Species to do research. They just found the easiest thing on the internet and just accepted it, and I'll use a pun, as the gospel truth, right? Just the truth. That has become a serious problem, especially in the United States, that a lot of college students are lacking critical thinking skills for whatever reason. It's too much work to do the research. They rely on Wikipedia. Is Wikipedia always reliable? No. So that has become a problem. So when it goes down also into someone who's being approached by a cult, and the cult's telling them A, B, C, and D are the truth, and they don't know to go and check it out, and they're at a big disadvantage. I know that when I got cancer 2.5 years ago, with what little background I have in science and medicine, I was able to go on the internet and start looking up the kind of tumor that I had to see if there's something that maybe in another country they found that could help it that maybe the doctor didn't catch. And I knew to go get another opinion from another doctor. Because I had basic science knowledge and it was something I could do and I knew how to search it. But how many people are not really involved in Judaism if they're asked to explain Isaiah? Oh, I'll give you a verse, for example. In America, it used to be in every hotel room in the United States of America, in the nightstand was a Bible. There is a Bible society that offered hotels free Bibles to put in the room. And it had the Old Testament and the New Testament. In fact, a number of years ago, the same Bible society offered to do it here in Israel and to put Hebrew English Old and New Testaments in every hotel room. I will say that our organization was part of the numerous groups that led an uproar saying, it'd be nice to put a Bible in the hotel room, but not theirs, right? So if you open up that Bible that's in these hotel rooms and you open up to the book of Psalms, how do we say Psalms in Hebrew? Tehillim? And you open up to Psalm 22, verse 16, and you read it in English, this is what the verse says. And in your mind, I want you to think who you think it sounds like. Don't say it out loud. It says, dogs have surrounded me. Evil people have encompassed me. They pierced my hands and feet. You smiled. You moved in your chair. Who did you think it sounded like? Not who it is. Who did it sound like?
Somebody crucified.
Jesus, or someone being crucified. Right? How many, honestly, when they heard it the way I read it, thought that sounds like someone being crucified? They had their hands and feet pierced. So Christians point to that as an example of a proof text in the Bible speaking about the crucifixion. So I had actually an MIT student who got involved in Christianity who came for 8 weeks to my house, 3 times a week, every Shabbat, studying the Bible because he had gotten involved in Christianity. And that was the first verse he quoted to me. Because sounds pretty convincing, right? So when he quoted it to me, instead of simply saying what it really means, I took a different approach. I said, if you don't mind, before we answer what that verse means, from Psalm 22, verse 16, there's a verse in the New Testament that I'd like you to read, and you tell me what it says. He was very excited that a rabbi wanted to understand a verse in the New Testament. I said, quick, which verse? I said, the second gospel, Luke, chapter 14, verse 26. He opens it up, and he reads it out loud, and to paraphrase, it says, Jesus was going with a group of people, and he told them, unless you hate your mother and father and brothers and sisters, you cannot be my student. When he read that, there was complete silence. Because what does that sound like it's saying? What's the prerequisite for being a disciple of Jesus, according to that, the way I just read it? You have to hate your family. Now, I don't know any Christians that believe that. But that's what the verse says. So he thought about it a minute, and he immediately said, Rabbi, you're reading the verse out of context. Not only that, you're reading it in English. And before it was in English, it was in Latin. And before it was in Latin, it was in Greek. And before it was in Greek, it was probably spoken in Aramaic, which was at the time what was spoken. And before that, the Aramaic, it was, in the Hebrew. So by the time it went down all these translations and out of context, it probably means that you need to put him before everyone else, not that you literally have to hate him. I said, fine, I accept that. Only on the condition that you recognize that the only way you'll know what it really means is if you research the original language and you check the context. He said, great. So I said, now let's go back to Psalm 22:16. Can you tell me what the Hebrew says? Can you tell me the context? And he couldn't. So I said, so based on your parameters, it could sound like someone's being crucified, and it may mean something completely different. Because that sure sounded like you have to hate your family, and you're telling me it means something else. So then we would study, what is the context? Who's speaking here? David HaMelech. What's he speaking about in the beginning of Tehillim? How he's running from the armies of King Shaul, who want to kill him. And in many of the Tehillim, he says they're like animals pursuing him. Even in Psalm 7, he says they're like raging lions. And the word that's used there that they translated as pierced is the word ka'ari. Like a lion. They're attacking his hands and feet like a lion would attack you. So by mistranslating the word slightly, by reading it not in context, it sounded like this, and this is again the process of critical thinking. Because if you can get a person to think about it and examine it, he'll realize it. But the thing that prevents them the most is this fear that I talked about earlier. That if they stop believing in it, they won't have a way to have salvation. So you've got to give them something else to hold on to. I counseled someone recently, and we were on Zoom for over an hour. And again, I did a lot of listening, and I didn't criticize anything that he believed in. I just talked about how spiritual Jerusalem is. And I talked to him about what I really love in my own life is something called hashgacha pratit, divine providence. That I stopped using the word coincidence. I don't believe things are coincidence. When I told everybody how I found the tumor, I got kicked in martial arts in the wrong place, and I found the tumor there. Okay, you could say it's a coincidence. I don't want to believe it's a coincidence. I think I was once driving with my wife and son many years ago, before the toll road was finished, from Svat to Modi'in, where my brother-in-law lives. And they had to go through all these different roads. And we stopped at Somet Zichron Yaakov, the intersection at a gas station. It was the middle of summer. It was extremely hot out. My son needed to use the Shirutim. As he got out of the car, I heard him scream at the top of his lungs. And as I turned, I saw a monit on the road hit a young girl, and she went flying, literally, over the car, did a somersault, and landed on her head. And you know the proverbial thing where they say people freeze in something like that? I'd never seen it before. Every person around me froze, couldn't move. I don't know what was in me, but maybe some of the training I've had with the police department. I ran to this girl, and I took her pulse, and she had no pulse. She was not breathing. And I started doing what's called Achyaa, CPR. And it was confusing for me because in CPR, usually you say, okay, here's a mannequin or a dummy to practice on, and the person's on their back. This girl was on her side. Her head was bleeding. And I was afraid to move her because no one told us, you start moving a person that had a traumatic injury like that. I found out later from an emergency room doctor said, if there's no pulse, don't worry about moving them because you can't make them more dead. Right now they're dead. They're dying. Try to bring them back to life. But I did something there. I put my leg behind her back and I was doing CPR sideways. And then out of nowhere, an Israeli showed up and he asked me if he could help. So he did the breaths and I did the chest compressions. But now new CPR is less about breaths. It's about lots of compressions because you're pushing air into the lungs anyhow. And after a while, she came back, and all the different medical things. The police came, and they took her to a trauma thing in near Tel Aviv, and they rushed her there. And thank God she now it's been many years. She finished the army. She went to college. She's married. She has children. Baruch Hashem. But what happened was this Israeli who lived east of Haifa looked at me because we're standing in the middle of the road and there's no cars are moving because everything's been stopped because of this accident, and he says to me, I was not supposed to be here. He says, I have driven for years from Haifa to Tel Aviv and back every day for work. I have never turned off onto this road ever, and today for some reason I caught myself either being absent-minded, and I made this turn, and after I made the turn, I saw the accident. I was not supposed to be here. How do you explain that? I said, if you weren't supposed to be here, I'm from California, right? I was not supposed to be here. So he's asking me now, and he was not religious, this guy. So I said, I can only tell you what I believe. I believe that even though I can't explain or understand why this girl had to be in an accident. That's not, some things are hidden to us. We'll never know. I don't know why I had to get cancer. I know that because I had it, I've helped many other people that have gone through it and counseled them, and I could speak to them from my own experience and my own fears. But I don't know why I had to get it. I don't know why, but I can say that I believe we're here because God wanted us to be here to help this girl at that moment. That was our test. Are we going to keep driving? And a lot of times in America, you have people that are attacked or something, and nobody intervenes. Nobody. All it takes, they teach in police psychology, all it takes is one person to go and intervene, and then everybody wakes up. But you have to be that first person. So I said, we went, and we were here, and I told them that, and I've never had this happen to me, even though I have my connections to Chabad. It was the first time a secular Israeli said, Yesh lecha tefillin? You have tefillin? And in the middle of the street, we're putting on tefillin there. Usually I'm the one going, do you want to put on tefillin? And, it's either yes or no or maybe. Here he was asking me, and we've stayed friends all these years. And I've stayed in contact with the family of that girl. So I'm very into, personally, I'm convinced, statistically, from many of the things that I've seen in my life, that these things are not mere coincidence. Could someone else write them off as coincidence? Yes, that's their choice. I prefer to not look at it that way, and I don't think it is. And I think Jewish theology and philosophy believes in divine providence. interesting last story. Do we have to end?
I mean,
Last story.
okay, last
Last story. Till the next story. There was a rabbi who in Europe, and he was such a scholar, people would bring him their books to read, and if he liked it, he would write an approbation in it that he approved of the book. And his students would always watch, because he had many different books from people, which book would he put on top of the other. Because if you're not familiar, there's usually a custom that based on the holiness of the book, you put the holiest one on top. So you put Chumash above Tehillim, above Gemara, and you do that. It reminds me that in the early years before television, when in America they used to have catalogs like Sears and Roebuck catalog and Montgomery Ward and all these different things that they would mail to people, and it had lots of pictures. Sears always made theirs the smallest. And someone asked the CEO, why did you do that? Because people pile it up like a pyramid. And he wanted his to be small so it would always be on the top so people look at it. But just a side note. So they wanted to see which book would he put up. So someone came to this rabbi and he gave him one book was insights into Jewish law and things like that. And the other book were these stories of divine providence. So when the rabbi took the books, he put the divine providence on top. So his students asked him, why did you do that? So he said, because this guy wrote the book about the insights into Jewish law, but the stories of divine providence was written by God. He made those things happen. So that's how I feel. Like, I don't know the mixture of what people's insights or they, but that's how I feel, and that's what I share with people. And I shared it. I talk a lot about that, and that's who I am, and that's what I do. And you're welcome to go to our website, and if you want to be partners with us, you can. Everything on our website's free. You don't have to pay for books that we have. You don't have to pay for articles. There's no charge for anything. If you want to become a supporter, there's a little teeny button that says donate. You can always help us, but you don't have to. Any questions?
All right. So thank you very much, Rabbi.
Amen.
Yeah, I mean, look, everyone's welcome to have more snacks,
And I'll stay around and
Yeah,
answer questions or talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rabbi.
Shabbat shalom, everyone.
And once again, Friday morning we have our